All right. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bcamp podcast. Today we have Peter Alcock, who is the head of artificial intelligence at Deed. So we are so excited to have you on our show. Thank you for joining. And to get started, can you just tell us a little bit about your role, uh, your journey, and how you got into the current role that you're at?
Yeah. So, as head of AI for Deed, my role and responsibility is to bring together all of the departments to a sort of common understanding of how AI can help their initiatives as departments. So this would be, me demonstrating to marketing how to use generative AI to sort of streamline a lot of content generation for their content marketing purposes. Use data enrichment to enhance their sort of lead lists and understand who it is they're marketing to. Generate strategic planning for marketing campaigns, and sort of make social media content marketing a lot more manageable. It also includes automating our sort of Zendesk customer support processes. So a lot of times you have very company specific issues that customers will submit support tickets for, like for instance adding a new nonprofit chapter, and the issues with like PayPal verification that come with that. That's something that you have to train AI to recognize in emails, and then automating how to respond to that such that customer support isn't repeating themselves over and over again. And so one of the things I did at the company was develop some API middleware that sort of acts as a liaison between Zendesk and OpenAI to monitor all of the issues that gets submitted by customers through our support ticketing system, and identify the ones that it already knows the answer to because we gave it to it, and then leave the very unique issues up to customer support to handle, which reduced their customer support tickets by 60%, which was, they were glad to do because, doing the same thing every day is very annoying. And so, anything that if it's worth doing, a few times, it's worth showing AI how to handle it and then leaving it to AI to do. Another part of my job is to show our C-level staff how to talk about our AI initiatives when asking for money, and like the way in which AI is going to enhance what we do for nonprofits. And so a lot of what our platform does is manage a lot of the common business processes that nonprofits need to deal with, like handling donations and creating events and organizing events and fundraising events. And what I've introduced to the company for AI purposes is, like automating, suggesting what kind of partnerships that fundraisers should pursue, generating the content and the copywriting in particular for throwing these events. On top of that, it's in an engineering standpoint, showing the developers how to use generative AI to streamline a lot of boilerplate code generation, and the constantly updated tools that are accessible to them, like Claude's artifacts, and OpenAI's new code generation projects allow for a lot easier refactoring of existing code um, using generative AI. It's a constantly evolving field, and so my job is really just to sort of stay on top of what's possible and accessible today to the rest of the departments we have at the company. And it's a really exciting position to be in. It allows me to constantly share my excitement and gush about the latest developments, and it really doesn't even feel like a job, honestly. It feels like me just like gushing about what is just naturally very exciting. um like as a kid, I started coding when I was 10, and I thought that the internet was the most important invention since fire. And as an adult, when I saw, LLMs and the evolution of AI come into play, I was like, well, this is like fire 3.0. This is like the most important invention since the internet. And so I get like my role at the company is really to just like give them that enthusiasm. It's great. I love my job.
I love that. I could definitely sense the enthusiasm about AI, and we'll dig in a little bit into some of those specific use cases you talked about because it's really cool how you've been able to automate things using AI. And you mentioned a little bit that you started coding when you were 10. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into AI?
Yeah. So several years ago, COVID happened, and it wiped out a lot. I was part of the tech layoffs, and so I ended up starting a cybersecurity company that used LLMs to automate assessing security logs and sort of boiling down what happened, and then automatically sending an email to the IT managers to be like, hey, so a number of break-in attempts happened. This is what you can do to remediate it. Looking at your current stack, this is probably the approach you need to take to stop this from happening going forward. And the problem I ran into was that I was up against some pretty significant giants in the industry for cybersecurity. And so I learned the hard way, like you got to start niche and you got to start small. And another problem I came into was that the salespeople that I hired, it took them a while to get up to speed on what I was talking about. And so I kind of ran
Mhm.
out of hands. And so I started a cybersecurity company using AI to analyze logs and simplify what was going on. But ultimately, I had to shut the company down and move into a position of consulting about how to use AI to simplify a lot of these complex technical processes for a company like Deed, who picked me up and they heard this story and they were like, "Oh, okay, well, like, I'm sorry to hear about your entrepreneurial failure, but come on in and show us what you've learned from your failures." And that is how I ended up where I am now.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's pretty bold just to jump in and start a company.
Yeah, it was all on a credit card, which I just paid off. So, that's good.
Nice. I love it. Well, great. So, maybe let's talk a little bit about some of the things you mentioned. Like, what are the biggest challenges you see in getting AI implemented, either in Deed or in companies that you've consulted for?
I think there's a lack of trust in AI because, in terms of like leaving it to itself to make decisions on behalf of people. I mean, because of like the hallucinations issue, right? There's a lot of like
Hmm.
bad press on AI. Like, if it doesn't know, it'll guess, and that's true. That's still a problem. Like, if it doesn't know, it's almost as if AI is kind of insecure about not knowing everything, and so it will make stuff up. And you do have to babysit it, and when providing it context as to what you want. So, if it, for instance, if you ask it to make you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, if you don't specify to put the lid back on the jar, it might not do that. It might just leave it out, and then the peanut butter goes stale. Like you do have to really hold its hand if you want exactly the results you need. And so there's a justified mistrust in leaving AI up to its own devices to do what you want. And so expressing to my constituents when I'm saying, hey, you should like let AI do this, I have to kind of follow up with like, but we're also going to make sure that we explicitly declare for it to stick to a number of rules and considerations, so that it doesn't just guess an answer. And like
Hmm.
that's kind of that's the responsibility of a prompt engineer, is like making sure that you really express exactly what you do and do not want when you're generating a prompt, and when you're generating like what I call an instruction set. That's
Hmm.
a an art and a science of its own that's still evolving, because at the end of the day, you know we've all come up with this sort of like LLM AI black box, and like it seems to work, but we don't totally understand how it works. Nobody fully understands how this
Hmm.
thing works. Like we took a very basic algorithm and we threw a ton of data at it. And the results have been amazing, but we don't fully understand exactly how it comes to all these conclusions every time. And that is why there's a justified fear by upper management of any company that you're introducing AI to, of letting AI start to take the wheel of things. And I and so when I tell a company like, hey, like we can use AI to streamline this or automate that, I always have to footnote it with like, but I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about. It's like you gotta be transparent. Like none of it. We're all kind of looking around, going, "Wow, this is really amazing," but we just invented fire again. But you could burn the stake, and that's just a risk that we're all have to take if we're going to be, the pioneers here. Or if any company wants to sort of, adopt these technologies to stay ahead of the competition, they're risking burning the steak because they're letting someone else cook it, right?
Hmm.
It
Yeah,
won't always
interesting.
come out medium rare.
I feel like this is a similar issue that predictive analytics has had, like any sort of computer aided prediction has had in the past, but it's just getting bigger and bigger as AI starts to be able to do more and more things.
Yeah, and like probably the hottest debate right now is, the use of AI in policing and, judicial systems, and it's already being used for, determining whether or not someone should be investigated. And the more and more we trust AI to make these decisions, the more risk we take in falsely classifying, events and people as criminal when we
Hmm.
introduce these technologies to do, in a judicial environment. Um, and
That's
and and
very
so,
interesting.
there's that risk of losing control over our discretion. It's always going to be a risk.
Interesting. Yeah. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about the technology stack that you use to solve some of these challenges? Take the Zendesk example that you gave. Can you talk a little bit like where you store the data, what models you're using, what APIs you're hitting?
Yeah. So the Zendesk automation is a combination of Zendesk's own API and the and Python Flask and Amazon Bedrock. And so Amazon Bedrock allows you to privately run LLMs like and choose, Claude, Llama, Jurassic, any of these sort of like flavors of LLMs that now are, you can privately host, so that you don't have to worry about, the data that you're using being used to train, a later successor to these
Hmm.
things. And so combination of creating API middleware between Zendesk and Amazon Bedrock allows me to take, events in Zendesk like a new customer support ticket,
Hmm.
take the content of it, take a prompt saying, "Hey, okay, here are all the common problems that customer supports typically whine about. Identify, if any, the one you see in this email, and then fire back a response to the customer on how to deal with it." And that assessment is handled by Amazon Bedrock LLM using Claude V2 right now. And then Amazon Bedrock responds back with, "Oh, the customer is probably whining about the following problem that you told us about." And then my Python Flask API says, "Okay, cool." And then fires it back to Zendesk and says, "Hey, Zendesk, this is how I want you to tag this ticket. Tag it with, PayPal is not verifying correctly." And
Hmm.
then Zendesk has an automated macro response whenever any ticket is tagged with that tag, to email the customer back, be like, "Oh, you need to follow these following instructions." And that streamlines that whole process. And so that is the sort of the formula for automating customer support when it pertains to, commonly identified issues, really, possibly at any company. So, any company that wants to automate, 60% of their customer support handling, really just needs to figure out, okay, well, what are like the top, X number of issues we have, come up with a tag for them,
Mm-hmm.
and then come up with a dictionary of like, hey, this issue, whenever people talk about this in an email, it's this tag. Whenever people talk about, this, it's typically this issue, and make a tag for that. And then let the LLM return a tag for every customer support issue that comes in, if any, and resultingly use the Zendesk API to make a call to tag that issue with that tag, and done. The rest of it is handled by Zendesk's sort of like macro auto response system. So you kind of you have to write a small amount of code in Python Flask to sort of middleman this relationship between AWS Bedrock and your Zendesk API,
Mm-hmm.
and the results are great once you do it. So I'll put on GitHub, sort of basic prototype later, and let the audience
Awesome.
kind of like edit it from there.
Yeah, awesome. Love that. And it sounds like some of the challenges are not necessarily technical challenges. Do any challenges come to mind of like, oh, this was like a tough technical challenge that I faced? Or is it more about just like, hey, creating the solutions and then training the end users how to use it effectively?
Yeah, honestly, like the engineering behind the solution, I guess you could say, I just described, um, the technical complexity is really more about how do you articulate to AI what to look for and what you want it to,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like how you describe your human problem to a machine.
Mm-hmm.
So like the machine needs you to talk about your human problem in a very machinistic way when you're
Mm-hmm.
developing the prompt that this like API middleware is going to rely on. And that's probably the majority of the engineering that went behind my customer support automation initiative at the company, was like, how do I like very non-emotionally describe what the, issue 1 through 10 look like. So for instance, like, oh, when the customer is complaining about not being able to add a new chapter of their nonprofit to the thing, they might run into the following issues. Issue number 1, issue number 2. But in the event that they're talking about this, that's an exception, and it's actually, tag number 3. Like, being very it's almost like thinking like a lawyer, right? Like you get to the
Mm-hmm.
goddamn point and you describe that in your prompt such that the AI doesn't get thrown off by even a single word where you're like, gosh darn it, like this is the most annoying thing, like leave all that out. Like just get to the point, because this is a machine you're describing and articulating to, and you're telling it, like issues 1 through 10, this is what to look for. And so like if there's any crossover in your description between, if issue number 3 that you describe, for it to look for, is at all similar to issue number 7, it's going to start screwing those up. So like you really need to make distinctions between, your iterations of something that AI is going to try to make a determination about. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
asking AI to make determinations, your iterations need to be very unique of their own, and they need to get to the point so that it's very obvious to the machine when it assesses something how to pick between the options that you've provided it in terms of classification.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. That's not trivial, and I
No.
feel like there's a lot of people talking about prompt engineering, and there's even a little bit of like, oh, is that really a thing? That's really a thing. I mean, that's the thought process that you're describing here about taking something ambiguous and, you know, being able to categorize it so machine can understand it.
Garbage in, garbage out, as the expression is.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Any thoughts about projects that you would love to do? Like, what are some of your top shelf
Hmm.
projects that you want to work on?
Well, right now, I'm hoping to start a nonprofit to bring workshops into elementary education classrooms to show teachers how to use generative AI and LLMs to do student assessments, to generate lesson plans, and to make more engaging curriculum for the students and more personalized learning programs, because those are typically very, very expensive. So say let's you like in individual education programs for special education in public education is expensive, and it's reserved for students who have shown difficulty in their consumption of the material, and it doesn't need to be expensive. In fact, you could have it for every student, and if you did have it for every student, you'd see an uptick in the success of every student, because you're addressing the unique learning styles of each pupil. And so AI can facilitate this if we can embed it into the curriculum that teachers who are usually asked to quote teach to the middle would use in their delivery of their materials throughout the year. And so one of that's probably the biggest project I'm currently working on, is figuring out how to create a workshop program for bringing AI into the elementary education system. On the lower end of the spectrum, I've got some projects on GitHub that automatically assess Craigslist antique postings and look at the likelihood of it being a fake and the asking price, and then assessing the margin of profit between the asking price and what the fair market value is. And if the counterfeit risk is above or below 30%, automatically send an email to me, be like, hey, you should go flip this chair. It's like, this guy's selling it for $300, it's actually worth $3,000. There's tons of stuff, sort of on my roster. I just don't have time to pursue most of these things. It's just I'm so excited about most of these potentials. It's just it comes down to a matter of like, what's worth pursuing.
Hmm.
I like to make the analogy that AI is sort of like this magic lamp that just suddenly fell on everyone's front steps. Except the difference is, instead of 3 wishes, you have unlimited wishes. But the only caveat is that whatever you wish for has to be emailed to you. So you can't just ask for a bicycle. But if you ask for something that can be emailed to you, you got it. You got it an unlimited number of times. That's an incredibly exciting proposal. For $20 a month, like, you get an unlimited number of wishes emailed to you. Like, man, like,
I love that.
where do you start or begin, like, end? Like, that's just wow. So, I mean, this is a really exciting time to be alive.
No, I love that. I love that. It's true though. It's almost like uh with more options, it feels like our time is just getting squished down into smaller and smaller. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So I love your nonprofit idea of getting AI into early education. And one of the questions that I really like to ask is just hear about your own educational experience. What are some of the good, maybe good experiences or bad experiences from your own education, if anything comes to mind?
So, as a kid, I got in trouble in school all the time. I was when I was in kindergarten, I actually got held back in kindergarten because I was just like, I was starting fights a lot, and like I was just kind of a rowdy kid. Um, and one of the requirements for graduating from kindergarten is you learn how to share your toys. Well, it took me an extra year to learn how to share my toys. And then after that, I was diagnosed with like ADHD, and so I was always I started teaching myself how to program when I was like 10. So by the time I was 12, I was writing all these computer viruses and stuff in like Visual Basic, which is now known as .NET, and instead of doing my homework. So in school, they instead of my free periods, they would make me go to this room where they would just like force me to do my homework because they knew I wouldn't do it after school. And so that really sucked. Like I didn't, like I missed out on free periods throughout my education because the school decided that I just wasn't going to do homework when I was at home. And so, it would have been nice to just not have homework, I guess you could say. But, after I graduated, I actually became an elementary school teacher for a short while. I was, the way I fell into this, I was 19, I was lifeguarding at my town pool, and my elementary school teachers came and I was teaching swim lessons, and I actually ended up teaching my own elementary school teachers' kids how to swim. And then they're like, "Hey, you should come substitute for our class. We're still teaching first, second, and third grade." And I was like, "No kidding. Okay." So I came and did that, and it was the funniest job I ever had. And so I ran with it, and I became a full time elementary school teacher for a little while. And then I ended up with a girlfriend who wanted to move down south, and I followed her and needed a job that paid better than an elementary school teacher would pay down south. So I had to kind of abandon that career and go back into tech. But I never forgot how much fun that was. And now I'm trying to kind of like re-engage that experience with what I've learned from being in the tech industry for so long since then, to the educational space. But I think that the most upsetting thing about my own education, and particularly my elementary education, was the lack of engagement that my teachers had with my own interests. Like there was, it was a very sedentary requirement for me to learn how to sit there in a chair for 8 hours a day and like do boring stuff. Like it was just boring. I wanted to throw my book. I didn't want to read my book. I wanted to like, I want to be outside. I want to be moving my hands. I want to be like manipulating my environment. I wanted to, I wanted to make a mess, and I wasn't allowed to make a mess in school. That sucked. Like if I was allowed to make a mess, I would have like learned way more stuff. And when I went home, I made a mess every single evening. And I taught myself all kinds of great stuff making messes. I probably learned a lot more teaching myself through the messes I made than I did in school. And so freedom to manipulate my environment was something that I definitely lacked in my educational experience. And, when I do have children, I really hope to give them the freedom to make a mess of their environment as part of their educational experience. Um, I
Have
think
you
that's a
ever looked
really
into a Sudbury school or a democratic school?
yeah, I have a great deal of respect for the Montessori method. And my sister actually lives in Lincoln Sudbury. And
Mm.
so, I should probably ask her how that's going with her kids. They were, like 2 and 3 right now. So they're a little early to ask, but I know that Lincoln Sudbury is basically a town full of professors who are also environmentalists, given their gorgeous backyards. And like, but I think that ultimately what the public education system was lacking with my experience was freedom of movement.
Hmm.
That was my biggest problem with it. And the whole philosophy of teaching to the middle leaves out both the kids that need more attention, and it abandons the kids that need less attention. And when I say less attention, I mean to say those kids that need more autonomy.
Hmm.
Um, and like how do you sift and sort of like classify a student's needs such that they're not misplaced. And I think that AI would be a great sorting hat
Hmm.
for where in school and how in school students should be presented material. Some children need regimen. They want a schedule. They want breakfast at a certain time. They want this. They want, they want it defined. Like some it's just like just prefer the militant approach. Other kids want chaos. They thrive in chaos and they want to think on their feet. They don't care about a 10-year plan. And so like figuring out like where you know, these stars align for each student is not a very reasonable approach to public education. Um, you know, normally, but now that we have, these means of taking the output of students and, analyzing it immediately in a flash, and then making a determination as to, okay, well, what's a good next step for this learning style. That's now possible, but
Hmm.
we have to explain how that's possible and give those tools to educators such that it doesn't sound so expensive, right? Because at the end of the day, you need funding for this, you need grant money, you need whatever. um,
Hmm.
and so proving that this theory can be done cost effectively is something that I'm really adamant about showing the world, um, because it would have saved my GPA. I probably would have gone to a much better school. I probably would have enjoyed my education experience a lot more if an LLM was determining that I probably shouldn't be in geometry class at 8 in the morning.
I think the answer would always be go out into the forest and
Yeah,
find bugs for elementary school kids. That would be the consistent answer, probably.
100%.
That's funny. Well, awesome. I love this vision, and we're coming up on our time a little bit. So I just want to ask one more question, and that is, what advice would you give to people that are looking to get into AI engineering?
I would say that um, a lot of what you'll encounter is people asking, like, what's your experience with, like the mathematics and the algorithms behind it. Um, and, despite what you'll hear, that's less important than getting familiar with how to be an AI whisperer, I guess you could say. Like, you don't need to know the anatomy of a horse to be a horse whisperer. You just need to be really
Hmm.
comfortable understanding how machines interpret articulation so that you can get back what you need. You don't need to know the math. You don't need to be able to, understand the epochs of building a machine learning model. Like, that's going to continue to be handled automatically by a lot of these frameworks and toolings that are out there. It's more that you become really comfortable and familiar with how to drive prompt engineering, and how to get what you want out of the access that we now all have to these technologies. It's, I hate to say it, but it's less important to know how it works, and it's more important to know how to work it.
Hmm.
So play with it. Play. Get your hands dirty. Because, like, you're not gonna build the next open AI competitor. Like, none of us are. That guy, Sam Altman already beat us to it. So just, like, figure out how to use what he's given us access to make your life easier.
Yeah, I love that. I love the advice to just play with it, get experience, build stuff, and you'll learn. So I love that.
Yeah, right. Look at
Well,
any animal group. Like, play is how they learn to hunt later and how to survive. Play will keep you alive. Play will teach you all the lessons that you need to succeed in life. Just play with it. Play with life.
I love that. I love that so much. That really resonates with me. It's even like video games and stuff.
Yeah.
Just play. No, I love this. And Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. You are a stud, and it's so fun to hear your enthusiasm and all the cool stuff that you're doing with AI. And yeah, we'd love to hear people's comments in about this episode.
Richard, it was great. This was great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to doing this again.